Hello and welcome, friends. Imagine a world where the boundaries of time seem to fade, and knowledge, wisdom, and secrets of the past are carefully preserved, waiting to be uncovered. A world where ancient scrolls, dust-covered books, and forgotten stories echo through the halls of a library that holds the sum of human thought and discovery. Welcome to the Library of Alexandria, one of the most legendary repositories of knowledge ever known to mankind. But this isn't just any story, this is your story too. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to stand in the presence of history, to touch the very pages that have survived centuries of turmoil, to be a witness to the wisdom of the ancients? Well, I invite you to step into the shoes of Lucius, a humble scribe, who, much like you and I, begins his journey with curiosity, driven by a thirst for knowledge and discovery. In the grand halls of the Library of Alexandria, Lucius finds himself faced with not only the task of preserving the past, but the duty to unlock the deepest secrets that time has hidden away. As we join Lucius on his journey, we'll unravel the mysteries together. Picture this: the dust motes dancing in the beams of sunlight, the scent of ancient parchment and ink in the air, and the weight of centuries pressing down upon each page you turn. It's not just about reading or transcribing, it's about unlocking the very essence of wisdom that has shaped the world. And in doing so, we ask ourselves, what if the knowledge of the past could change the course of our future? So, whether you're a lover of history, a seeker of secrets, or simply someone who enjoys a story where the past and present collide, you're in the right place. Together, we'll explore what lies behind the walls of the most mysterious library in history. And with each step, we'll uncover what it truly means to be the keeper of knowledge. I hope you're ready to immerse yourself in a journey through time, mystery, and discovery. And don't forget to interact with us. I'd love to know what you think about the unfolding story. What secrets do you think Lucius will discover? What would you do if you were in his shoes? Feel free to drop a comment below, share your thoughts, and let's dive deeper into this adventure together. Now, let's turn the page and begin our journey. Welcome to the story of Lucius, the scribe who will redefine what it means to preserve knowledge and perhaps change the world in the process. Ready? Let's begin. The last traces of daylight slowly withdrew beyond the towering columns of the Library of Alexandria, and with it came a profound silence that settled over the ancient halls like a shroud. The wind, as though it respected the sanctity of this place, hardly dared to stir the air. Inside, the scent of time-worn parchment and the ink of centuries past mingled with the faint, comforting aroma of oil lamps burning steadily in the dim light. The soft, rhythmic sound of quills scratching across papyrus filled the space with a quiet, meditative energy, the kind of sound that seemed to belong to another time, another world altogether. In the heart of this immense structure, amid the shelves of scrolls and manuscripts, sat Lucius, a scribe of modest rank but significant responsibility. His eyes, though strained from long hours of work, remained sharp and focused, his gaze locked onto the papyrus in front of him. His fingers, stained with ink, moved with practiced precision, transcribing the ancient texts with a care that belied his quiet demeanor. Lucius had become part of the rhythm of the library, a fixture in its endless cycle of recording, preserving, and sharing the knowledge of the ages. To the outside world, he was little more than a cog in the wheel of history, but within the walls of the library, he had his place, and in that, he found purpose. However, tonight was different. The air, usually cool and dry, felt thicker, more oppressive. It was as though the very stones of the library were holding their breath, suspended in time, awaiting something. Lucius couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was about to unfold. He glanced at the flickering flame of his lamp, which seemed to pulse in the dimness like a heartbeat, casting long, wavering shadows that danced across the marble walls. There was something uncanny about the way the light flickered, something that made his heart beat a little faster, though he couldn't quite place why. His thoughts wandered briefly, as they often did, toward the vast expanse of knowledge contained within these walls. In some ways, it felt like an infinite treasure trove of the world's most profound insights. Yet in others, it felt like a prison, its endless scrolls and texts weighing heavily on his shoulders. Was it arrogance that drove him to copy the same stories and philosophies day after day? Or was it simply the quiet obedience of a man who had found his place, found his purpose, within these hallowed halls? But as Lucius pondered these questions, a peculiar sensation gripped him, a tightening in his chest that he couldn't explain. The familiar surroundings, so constant and timeless, felt different tonight. The space around him seemed to hum with a strange, intangible energy, as if the library itself were aware of him, watching him with ancient eyes, waiting for him to notice. As the final hour of his shift loomed closer, Lucius felt a deep stirring within him, a sense that he was standing on the precipice of something much larger than the simple task of transcription. It was as though this night, this very moment, was an inflection point in the flow of history. A faint rustle, no louder than the soft turning of a page, broke the silence, drawing his attention away from the papyrus. Lucius froze, quill poised in midair, his ears straining to catch any further sound. It was unlike anything he had heard before in this great library, more like the deliberate movement of someone trying to remain unseen. It wasn't the familiar sound of books being shelved, nor was it the shuffle of footsteps from a fellow scribe or scholar. This was something else, something more mysterious. His curiosity piqued. Lucius slowly rose from his stool, the wood creaking under his weight. His hand instinctively reached for the lamp beside him, the warm glow casting long shadows as he stepped forward into the darkness. He moved cautiously, aware that the library, vast as it was, held many secrets in its winding halls and narrow alcoves. The further he went, the more the shadows seemed to lengthen, stretching and curling in the dim light like living things. The air grew colder, heavier, as if it, too, was holding its breath, waiting. Then, as he rounded a corner, Lucius stopped abruptly, his heart hammering in his chest. Before him, in a small alcove nestled between two towering bookshelves, stood a figure cloaked in shadow. The stranger's form was indistinct, almost ethereal. But what struck Lucius most was the large tome the figure cradled in their hands. The book seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, its cover adorned with strange, shimmering symbols that caught the lamplight, casting reflections that danced on the surrounding walls. Lucius felt an overwhelming sense of wonder and dread fill him as his gaze fixed upon the book. It felt as if it was calling to him, drawing him closer, whispering to him of secrets buried deep within its pages. Without thinking, Lucius took a step forward. The figure, sensing his movement, turned slightly, revealing eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries, eyes that gleamed with ancient wisdom and unspeakable knowledge. It was a gaze that pierced through him, looking not just at him, but through him, as though seeing into the very core of his being. "Who are you?" Lucius managed to whisper, his voice barely audible in the stillness of the library. The question seemed inadequate, yet it was all he could manage in the face of such an extraordinary encounter. The figure's lips parted in a faint smile, their voice calm, yet filled with a depth that resonated in the very bones of Lucius. "A seeker, like you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Lucius felt a chill run down his spine as the weight of the figure's statement settled over him. "A seeker," they said. The phrase stirred something deep inside him, something he had never fully acknowledged before. Was he truly a seeker? Had he not always been content in his role as a humble scribe, copying the words of others? Or was there more to his life, more to his purpose, than mere transcription? "What is that book?" Lucius asked, his voice trembling slightly despite his best efforts to sound composed. He was transfixed by the tome, unable to take his eyes off it. The stranger glanced down at the book, cradling it gently as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "It is a relic of knowledge," they said, their voice almost a whisper. "It contains truths that have been hidden for centuries, truths that could alter the very fabric of our understanding. It holds the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe if you are brave enough to seek them." The words sent a ripple of unease through Lucius. The idea of truths so powerful, so dangerous, that they could reshape everything he knew about the world was both exhilarating and terrifying. His mind raced, caught between a burning curiosity and a deep, instinctual fear. What kind of truths could such a book hold? And more importantly, why was this figure revealing it to him? Of all people, Lucius felt his heart pounding in his chest as the flame of his lamp flickered again, casting erratic shadows across the alcove. The stranger's eyes never left him, their gaze steady and knowing. In that moment, Lucius knew that he stood at a crossroads, a place where the past, the present, and the future converged. The library, ancient and full of forgotten wisdom, had witnessed countless events in history, but tonight it seemed to whisper to him of something more, a secret waiting to be unearthed, a destiny yet to unfold. He stood there, torn between fear and longing. The choice was his, and in that moment, Lucius realized that the library was not just a place of knowledge, it was a place of transformation. And whatever lay in the pages of that ancient tome would shape not only his life, but the course of history itself. With a steadying breath, Lucius nodded. His decision was made. He would step beyond the confines of his safe, predictable life. He would leave behind the comfort of the known and enter the realm of the unknown, guided by the flickering flame of knowledge that had always illuminated his path. But tonight, that flame held a new promise, a promise of discovery, of change, of a journey that would lead him into the heart of mysteries far greater than he could ever have imagined. And so, Lucius took his first step into the darkness, his lamp held high, as the shadow of the stranger merged with his own in the dim light of the library's hallowed halls. The scroll Lucius had been copying for the last several nights felt different from all the others. The moment his hands brushed against it, a shiver passed through him, as if he were handling something far more ancient than any of the manuscripts he had worked with in his years at the library. The edges of the papyrus were frayed, as though countless generations before him had handled it, passed it along, and revered its words. The ink, once bold and firm, had faded in places, the letters barely distinguishable from the background, as though time itself had begun to erase them. And yet, Lucius pressed on, determined to preserve whatever knowledge remained within those delicate fibers. Unrolling the fragile scroll, he felt a strange sensation, a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the air, as though he had crossed a threshold into a sacred space beyond the physical. His surroundings seemed to recede, and for a moment he was lost in the quiet rustle of the papyrus, the only sound in the vast library. The words on the page shimmered faintly in the dim light of his lamp, their ancient ink seeming to pulse as if they were alive, as if they held something beyond mere knowledge, a pulse, a presence, an essence. His quill hovered above the surface, uncertain, as if it too could sense the gravity of the task at hand. Lucius had transcribed many scrolls in his time, but this one was different. The ink felt colder, the words heavier, as though they carried the weight of centuries of wisdom and secrets long buried. He took a deep breath and pressed the quill to the papyrus, resuming his work. Each stroke was deliberate, careful, his fingers stained with ink as they danced across the surface. Yet, in the back of his mind, a fleeting thought flashed. What if this is the last copy? The thought was gone almost as quickly as it came, but it lingered at the edges of his consciousness, like a whispered warning. Could it be true? Could this be the final iteration of this ancient text, the last trace of a civilization long forgotten, a manuscript that had outlived the very empire that birthed it? The thought gnawed at him, and he found it impossible to ignore. For the first time in his life, Lucius felt as if he were standing on the precipice of something far greater than mere transcription. His fingers paused, hovering above the papyrus, his thoughts racing. Why had this particular scroll been entrusted to him? His heart began to quicken, the air around him thick with anticipation. He had copied many scrolls in his time, but none had felt like this. This was not just another task to complete, another line of text to transcribe. This felt different, as though the scroll itself was calling out to him, pulling him into its depths. Why had no one else been tasked with it? And why had it been left to him, a humble scribe, to preserve its final words? Lucius was used to the quiet of the library, the steady rhythm of work that stretched on through the endless hours. But tonight, the atmosphere felt charged, the silence more profound, more pressing. The library, vast and ancient, seemed to pulse with an energy that he couldn't quite understand. The soft flicker of the lamp's flame seemed to respond to his unease, wavering as if in agreement with the unsettling thoughts that ran through his mind. It was as though the very air around him was holding its breath, waiting for him to decide. But still, despite the unease, Lucius pressed on. He dipped his quill into the ink, the delicate dance of pen on papyrus, resuming as his thoughts, though swirling, fell back into the familiar rhythm of his work. As the hours passed, he found himself losing track of time. The world outside, the shifting winds, the passing of the night, the distant sounds of the city faded into an inconsequential blur. Here, in the quiet of the library, there was only him and the scroll, two entities bound together by the quiet urgency of preservation. The further he transcribed, the more the words on the papyrus began to reveal themselves subtly at first, imperceptibly, but growing more apparent with each passing moment. Lucius had always prided himself on his attention to detail, on his ability to read between the lines, to uncover hidden meanings where others saw only ink and parchment. But this was something different. As his quill traced each line, he began to notice strange variations in the text. The letters were familiar, the script elegant as always, but there were subtle differences, an extra flourish here, an unexpected break in the rhythm there. At first, Lucius assumed it was a quirk of the scribe who had originally penned the manuscript, perhaps a sign of age or wear. But as he continued, a thought gnawed at him. Were these intentional? Were they meant to be noticed? Or was this just the slow unraveling of a text that time had claimed for its own? The variations seemed to form a pattern, faint but unmistakable, as though a secret code had been woven into the very fabric of the manuscript. His curiosity, already piqued by the unique feel of the scroll, deepened. Was this hidden language something the original scribe had intended to pass down to those who could understand? Or was it something older, a message left by the unknown hands that had crafted the manuscript long before? Lucius felt a strange compulsion to decipher it, to uncover whatever it was that lay buried beneath the surface of these words. The library around him seemed to hum, as if aware of his growing awareness. The lamp flickered again, casting long shadows that stretched across the walls, making the already eerie atmosphere feel even more charged. The quiet of the space, so familiar and comforting, now felt oppressive, as though the walls themselves were closing in on him. The faint rustle of the scroll, as it unfurled under his careful touch, sounded almost too loud in the stillness. Despite the mounting unease, Lucius found himself drawn deeper into the text. The words seemed to whisper to him now, not in the sense of being heard, but in the sense of being felt, understood on some deeper, primal level. They told tales of ancient wisdom, of forgotten lore, of long-lost knowledge that had once shaped civilizations. It was as though the manuscript itself knew its own significance, knew that time was running out, that its very existence was teetering on the brink of oblivion, and it was calling to him, urging him to continue, to uncover its secrets before they were lost to time forever. The deeper Lucius delved into the text, the more he felt a sense of urgency growing within him. The hours blurred into each other as he transcribed the words, each one carrying a weight far greater than the ink with which it was written. It was as though each line connected him not only to the past, but to something beyond the tangible, a sense that he was, in some way, a part of a much grander story, a story that spanned millennia, a story that had been written long before he had ever picked up a quill. The night stretched on, the only light coming from the flickering flame of the lamp, its shadows growing long and shifting in the dimness. Lucius was aware of the growing ache in his wrist, the weariness that tugged at his eyelids, the strain in his back from the hours hunched over the scroll. Yet, despite his exhaustion, he remained focused. This was not just a simple task. This was something more. It was a responsibility, an imperative to preserve this knowledge, to ensure that the wisdom of the ancients would not fade into obscurity. With each stroke of his quill, Lucius felt a deeper connection to the past. He was no longer simply copying words from one scroll to another. He was preserving a legacy. The weight of that realization settled on his shoulders, and yet, paradoxically, it filled him with a sense of purpose he had never known before. The knowledge contained in this scroll was too precious, too powerful to be lost, and it was in his hands to ensure its survival. And so, despite the exhaustion, despite the growing sense of foreboding that seemed to cling to the air like a second skin, Lucius pressed on. He felt as though the scroll was guiding him, urging him forward, urging him to see it through to the end. There was no turning back now. He had crossed a threshold, and there was no other choice but to continue. With renewed resolve, Lucius dipped his quill once more into the ink and resumed his work. Each stroke of the pen brought him closer to the end of the scroll, closer to the completion of a task that, in his heart, he knew would shape the course of history. The night was far from over, and neither was his journey. As Lucius continued his work, a subtle but persistent hum seemed to grow within the walls of the Library of Alexandria. It was as though the very building itself, vast and ancient, was vibrating with an energy that he couldn't explain. The sounds of the world outside, the distant cries of the city, the gentle breeze that would sometimes stir the library's open windows, these faded into nothingness. All that remained was the quiet rustling of papyrus, the soft scratch of his quill on the page, and the oppressive sense of something watching. It was an unsettling feeling, one he had never experienced before in the many hours he had spent in this hallowed space. The shadows, once faint and innocuous, began to move in the corners of the room. At first, it was hardly noticeable, just a slight shift in the way the light from his flickering lamp cast strange, elongated forms against the marble walls. But as the minutes stretched on, the shadows seemed to warp and stretch, reaching out toward him like dark tendrils, creeping ever closer. Lucius stiffened, his quill faltering mid-stroke, his eyes darting nervously from one corner of the room to the next. He shook his head as if trying to dislodge the feeling, trying to convince himself that it was nothing more than a trick of the light. But deep down, he knew there was something more to it than that, something in the very air around him, heavy with a presence that was impossible to ignore. He had spent countless hours in this library, transcribing countless scrolls, immersed in the dusty silence of its towering shelves. Each night, the library had been a sanctuary, a place of quiet reverence where he could lose himself in the delicate act of preserving knowledge. But tonight was different. The air felt thick, suffocating even, as if the very walls of the library were closing in on him. And yet, the library was still. Not a single whisper of wind disturbed the quiet. Only the occasional crack of the beams as they settled into the stone foundation of the building broke the silence. It was an eerie stillness, one that felt unnatural, as if the very fabric of time and space had momentarily fractured. Lucius glanced over his shoulder, his heart beating faster now. He half expected to see one of the elder scholars or library attendant standing in the doorway, their wise, knowing eyes observing him with silent judgment. But there was no one. Only the shelves, filled with the accumulated knowledge of countless generations, stood in silent witness. The books and scrolls, each imbued with the wisdom of ages, seemed to hum with a secret that Lucius could not quite grasp. The only sound was the faint scratching of his quill against the papyrus, yet even that noise seemed distant, muffled by the growing weight of his thoughts. His pulse quickened as he felt the shadows stretch further into the room, creeping along the walls like dark, insistent fingers. The eerie, insistent feeling of being watched intensified, and Lucius could feel his breath catching in his chest. It was as though the very air had thickened, every corner of the room now teeming with an unspoken presence, pressing in on him from all sides. He was no longer certain whether the shadows were merely playing tricks on his mind, or if they were something else altogether, something older, something that had always been here, waiting. Suddenly, Lucius stood, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved away from the table, his legs trembling with the weight of the strange tension in the air. He needed to move, to do something to shake off this feeling, this sense of impending doom. His eyes flicked around the room again, but the library, despite its vastness, seemed to be closing in on him. The lamp in his hand cast wavering, unpredictable shadows, and Lucius had the distinct impression that the darkness was alive, moving toward him as though it were a living creature. He inhaled sharply, forcing himself to calm his racing thoughts. It was just his imagination, he told himself. The shadows were just shadows. The library had always been quiet, and tonight, perhaps his mind was simply more attuned to the silence. He had always prided himself on his rationality, his ability to focus on the task at hand. But tonight, something was different, something he couldn't quite explain. The walls felt as though they were watching him, listening to him. The very air around him seemed to hum with a growing tension, as though the library itself were aware of his presence and of the work he was doing. What had once been a place of knowledge now felt like a labyrinth of ancient secrets, each corner holding something unseen, waiting to be discovered. Lucius took a few hesitant steps, moving deeper into the library, away from his workstation. He forced himself to breathe deeply, trying to rid himself of the panic rising in his chest. The shadows seemed to stretch even further now, like they were following him, trailing behind him, just at the edge of his vision. He turned quickly, expecting to see something or someone behind him, but there was nothing. The library, with its towering shelves and endless rows of scrolls, remained as empty as ever. He shook his head again, trying to dispel the unease that had settled in his bones. He had transcribed for hours on end in this very room, never once feeling this kind of foreboding. The library had always been a place of sanctuary, a place where the past could be preserved, a place where knowledge was safe. But tonight, it felt different. The air was thick with something intangible, something ancient, something that seemed to reach into the very depth of his soul. Lucius returned to his desk, the flickering lamp casting strange, jagged shadows across the parchment before him. He sat down slowly, his fingers trembling as he reached for his quill. He needed to continue. He needed to focus on his work. The scroll in front of him, that mysterious, worn text, seemed to beckon him, its faded ink a reminder of the weight of the task before him. But his mind refused to settle, his thoughts racing with questions that he couldn't answer. Why had this scroll been entrusted to him? What was it about this particular manuscript that felt so different? Why did it seem as though the fate of something greater than himself rested in his hands? His quill hovered over the papyrus once again, but the words before him seemed to swim in and out of focus, as if they were shifting, changing, revealing something he wasn't quite ready to understand. The more he looked at them, the more he felt that there was something hidden beneath the surface, something buried within the delicate strokes of the scribe's hand. Lucius forced himself to steady his breath, to center his mind. He needed to finish the transcription. But as he resumed his work, a strange feeling lingered. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to draw closer, and the flickering light of his lamp cast long, dancing forms on the walls, stretching and warping in the strange, unnatural glow. His hand shook slightly as he pressed his quill to the papyrus, but he continued, his focus shifting between the task at hand and the unnerving presence that seemed to surround him. As the hours passed, Lucius found himself sinking deeper into the rhythm of the transcription, the quiet hum of the library fading into the background. The words on the scroll seemed to shimmer before his eyes, inviting him to look closer, to understand their deeper meaning. They whispered to him, soft and insistent, urging him to delve deeper into their mysteries, to uncover the truths they held hidden. The shadows in the room, once menacing, now seemed to retreat slightly, as if giving way to the power of the words before him. The library was no longer a place of simple transcription. It was a realm of ancient power, and Lucius was beginning to understand that he was no longer just copying the words of the past. He was becoming part of something greater, something that transcended time and space. The knowledge contained within the scroll was not merely for him to record, it was for him to unlock. And in that moment, Lucius knew that whatever lay ahead, whatever secrets the library held, would forever alter the course of his life. His heart raced with a mixture of fear and anticipation. But as the final words of the manuscript appeared before him, he knew that his journey was just beginning. The shadows had retreated, but something deeper, something more profound, had taken its place. The air was thick with the weight of discovery, and Lucius could not help but feel that the library, in all its ancient wisdom, had been waiting for him to uncover its most sacred secrets. The hours continued to slip by, each one merging with the next in a seamless blur as Lucius labored over the fragile scroll. His quill moved across the papyrus with a steady rhythm, but his mind, once sharp and focused on the task, had begun to wander. The shadows in the room seemed to grow longer with each passing minute, their edges shifting and warping in the dim, flickering light of his lamp. The once quiet hum of the library now felt suffocating, as though the very walls of the building were holding their breath, waiting for something. And Lucius, despite the weight of his work, could not shake the feeling that something far greater than the words he was transcribing had begun to stir in the air around him. As his quill hovered over the papyrus, his thoughts drifted to a conversation he had overheard months earlier, an exchange between two of the elder scholars, their voices low and hushed as they discussed matters too secret for the ears of an apprentice like him. Lucius had been sitting quietly in a darkened corner of the library, transcribing another scroll, when the words of the scholars reached his ears. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their conversation had been too intriguing to ignore. "The last of its kind," one of the scholars had said, his voice heavy with the weight of some great unspoken truth. "When the scroll is finished, it will be no more." The words had struck Lucius with a force he hadn't expected. The last of its kind, he had been unable to forget that phrase, the way it echoed in his mind like a distant, haunting refrain. At the time, he had thought little of it. Perhaps the scholars were discussing a particular manuscript, an old text that had reached the end of its preservation. But now, as he sat alone in the library, the weight of those words seemed to press upon him, as if they were meant for him alone. Could it be that the scroll he was copying, the one that had felt so different from all the others, was, in fact, the very last of its kind? Could this fragile, ancient papyrus be the final remaining testament to some long-lost knowledge, a piece of the past that would vanish forever once the final word was transcribed? Lucius's hand trembled as he held the quill, the ink blotting slightly on the parchment. The thought was almost too much to bear. He had always known that the library housed knowledge of great power, but the idea that he might be the final scribe to preserve this particular scroll, the last keeper of its secrets, filled him with a mixture of awe and dread. The task had never seemed so monumental, so fragile. The scroll in his hands, weathered by the centuries, was more than just an artifact. It was a living thing, connected to the past in ways Lucius could not yet comprehend. And now it was his responsibility to see it through to its end. For a moment, Lucius closed his eyes, the weight of the realization settling over him. He could almost see the library as it once was, a bustling center of knowledge and learning, filled with scholars, philosophers, and thinkers from all corners of the known world. The scrolls and manuscripts that lined the shelves had once been guarded by the most learned of men, each one sworn to preserve the knowledge contained within them. But now, in the stillness of the night, The library felt almost deserted, as if the great flood of time had claimed all but a few remnants. Lucius had become part of that dwindling line of keepers, the last to safeguard the scrolls and wisdom that had once flourished here. The silence in the room was oppressive. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch impossibly long, curling around the columns and walls like creeping fingers. And yet, despite the quiet, Lucius felt an overwhelming presence in the space, a sense that the library itself was aware of his actions, that the great edifice was watching, waiting. He had always been a part of this world, immersed in the rhythm of transcription and preservation. But tonight, that rhythm had changed. Tonight, he felt as if he were on the precipice of something far greater than the sum of his tasks. What truth lies within these ancient words? Lucius thought to himself. The very idea of the scroll's finality sent a shiver down his spine. What if this was the key to some ancient, forgotten knowledge? What if the wisdom contained in these lines, when fully transcribed, could alter the course of history? And more terrifying still, what if Lucius, the lowly scribe, was the only one who could unlock that truth before it slipped away into the void of time? His mind raced with questions, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The weight of the library, the shadows that seemed to breathe in the corners of the room, the flickering flame of the lamp, it was all becoming too much to bear. Lucius knew he had to press forward. He could not allow this knowledge, this history, to slip through his fingers. Not now, not when it seemed so close, so tantalizingly within reach. He steadied himself, taking a deep breath and steadying his hand. The quill touched the papyrus once more, and with it, Lucius felt a renewed sense of purpose. The scroll had to be finished. The words needed to be preserved. He would not let it be lost. The weight of history pressed down on him, but it also filled him with a strange sense of belonging, as though he were fulfilling a destiny that had been set in motion long before his birth. As Lucius resumed his work, the scroll seemed to come alive beneath his touch. The symbols and letters danced before his eyes, forming a tapestry of knowledge that stretched across the ages. Each stroke of his quill was not just a copy of the past, but a bridge that connected him to the scribes who had come before him, those who had meticulously recorded these same words, those who had guarded this knowledge with their very life. Lucius felt as though he was no longer simply copying words. He was becoming part of a legacy, a continuum of knowledge that had endured against all odds. The scroll was no longer just an artifact, it was a living testament to the enduring power of wisdom, to the quiet force that had kept it alive through the centuries. The room around him seemed to fade, as Lucius became lost in the rhythm of his work. His quill moved almost automatically, each stroke bringing him closer to the end of the scroll. But as the night wore on, he began to notice something strange. The symbols on the scroll seemed to shift and change as he wrote, like shadows of their former selves, whispering in a language just beyond his understanding. It was as though the scroll itself was aware of the importance of the moment, urging him to continue, to push deeper into its mysteries. And so Lucius pressed on, the weight of the library, the weight of history, urging him forward. He could almost hear the voices of those who had come before him, voices that had been silent for centuries, yet now seemed to guide his hand. He was no longer just a scribe. He was a keeper, a guardian of knowledge. And with every word he transcribed, he was becoming part of a living tradition that spanned generations. The knowledge of the ancients, the wisdom of those who had walked these halls before him, was now in his hands, and Lucius would ensure that it would never be lost. As the night stretched on, Lucius felt a deep sense of purpose settle within him. He had always known that the task of a scribe was important, but now he understood that it was more than that. He was not merely recording the past, he was safeguarding the future. The knowledge contained in this scroll was not just for him, not just for the library, but for the world. And it was his responsibility to ensure that it would continue to inspire and enlighten future generations. With each stroke of his quill, Lucius felt his connection to the past grow stronger. He had become part of something greater, something that transcended time. The Keeper's secret was not just about preserving the scroll, it was about preserving the knowledge contained within it, ensuring that the wisdom of the ancients would continue to guide humanity for generations to come. But little did Lucius know, this journey, this simple act of transcription, would take him to places he never imagined. It would reveal truths that would change his life forever and force him to confront the very fabric of the world around him. The scroll held secrets that had been hidden for centuries, and Lucius was the one destined to unlock them. The path ahead was uncertain, but Lucius knew one thing for sure: he would see it through. The wind outside had begun to stir, its soft howls and murmurs rattling the windows of the library. The gusts of air pressed against the old stone walls, sending a shiver through the beams of wood that supported the great structure. Lucius paused in his work, listening to the subtle creaks that seemed to echo through the vast, hallowed halls. It was as though the library itself had come alive with the shifting winds, stretching and groaning like a living being disturbed from an eternal slumber. The walls, once silent sentinels to centuries of knowledge, were now whispering, as if aware of the monumental task being undertaken within them. Lucius glanced down at the scroll in front of him. The ink was still wet, though it had begun to dry in the cool air, the edges of the papyrus curling slightly as the moisture evaporated. His fingers hovered above the page, quill poised, but his mind wandered, drawn away from the task at hand. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, each word he transcribed seeming heavier than the last. A deep unease settled within him, an unsettling thought that he could not shake. What if this was it? What if, when he finished the final transcription, this ancient knowledge would slip away forever? The scroll, fragile and worn with the passage of time, might crumble into dust. The words it contained, the wisdom and secrets of long-forgotten minds, would vanish from the world. A part of Lucius recoiled at the very thought, the loss of an entire chapter of history, slipping through his fingers like sand, fading into obscurity. How could he bear such a thought? How could he stand to witness the extinction of knowledge that had survived so many generations, only to be lost in the final moments of its preservation? But another, quieter part of him, the part that had always felt the weight of the library's ancient purpose, understood that this was how it had always been. Knowledge, like everything else in the world, was transient. It was born, it lived, and it died. Empires rose and fell. Civilizations flourished and crumbled. The scrolls that lined the shelves of the library had once been the treasure troves of their time-prized possessions, symbols of power and wisdom. Yet many of those scrolls had already vanished into the winds of history, lost to fire, rot, or war. Nothing was permanent. Everything was fleeting, even the knowledge that had once shaped the world. Lucius felt a trembling in his fingers as he reached for his quill once more. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him with an intensity he had never known before. He was not merely a scribe tonight. He was the keeper of something far greater, something that had endured for centuries and was now at the brink of fading away forever. He was the final thread in a long line of scribes who had transcribed, preserved, and passed on the knowledge of the ancients. It was an honor, but also a burden that he had never quite realized until this moment. The library itself seemed to echo his thoughts. It was more than just a repository of books and scrolls. It was a living, breathing testament to the ebb and flow of human thought and discovery. It had stood for centuries, a monument to the pursuit of knowledge, to the idea that truth could be found in the written word. Each document within its venerable walls held stories untold, mysteries unsolved, and wisdom accumulated over countless decades. The library had seen the rise of kings and the fall of empires. It had withstood the ravages of time, its walls lined with the collective wisdom of every era. As Lucius dipped his quill into the inkwell, he thought of the countless hands that had done the same before him. Scholars, philosophers, seekers of truth, each of them had contributed to the vast tapestry of knowledge that he now held in his hands. The scroll before him was but one small thread in that tapestry, yet it carried with it the hopes and dreams of those who had come before. Every letter, every symbol inscribed upon it was a bridge across time, connecting him to men and women who had lived long before he was born, who had dreamed of the same things he now dreamt of: knowledge, understanding, truth. He considered for a moment the life of the scroll. It had traveled through the hands of countless scribes, each one copying its words, preserving its meaning for the next generation. And now it was his turn. The thought of it filled him with both pride and sorrow. It was a privilege to be entrusted with such a task, but it also brought with it a profound sense of loss. He was transcribing the last words of an era, the final traces of an ancient world. Once the scroll was finished, its work would be done. Its final chapter would be written, and the knowledge it contained, this single thread in the vast web of human understanding, would either endure or fade into the past. Outside, the winds continued to shift, the gusts becoming stronger as the evening deepened. They carried with them the scent of rain, the promise of change. Lucius could almost feel the coming storm in the air, the tension building with every gust of wind, every creak of the library's wooden beams. It was as if the world outside was mirroring his own internal storm, the swirling thoughts and emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. The winds were shifting, carrying with them the echoes of the past, the whispered knowledge of those who had come before him. And Lucius could not help but wonder, was he prepared to bear the weight of what he was preserving? Was he ready for the responsibility that came with it? He took a deep breath, trying to center himself. The winds outside would continue to shift. The world would continue to change, regardless of what he did within these walls. But the knowledge he was transcribing, this ancient wisdom, would remain. Perhaps it would not remain in the same form, but its essence, its ideas, would endure. The spirit of discovery, the thirst for understanding, would never fade. Lucius took comfort in that thought. No matter what happened to this particular scroll, the pursuit of knowledge would never cease. Even when one chapter closed, others would open. With renewed determination, Lucius returned to his work. Each stroke of the quill was a silent vow to the past and a promise to the future. It was a gift to those who would come after him, a legacy that would continue to inspire, to inform, to guide. The wind outside may have been shifting, but the spirit of discovery, of learning, remained constant. And Lucius knew that no matter what happened to the world around him, the search for truth would never waver. He considered, for a moment, the life of the scroll. It had traveled through the hands of countless scribes, each one copying its words, preserving its meaning for the next generation. And now it was his turn. The thought of it filled him with both pride and sorrow. It was a privilege to be entrusted with such a task, but it also brought with it a profound sense of loss. He was transcribing the last words of an era, the final traces of an ancient world. Once the scroll was finished, its work would be done. Its final chapter would be written. And the knowledge it contained, this single thread in the vast web of human understanding, would either endure or fade into the past. Outside, the winds continued to shift, the gusts becoming stronger as the evening deepened. They carried with them the scent of rain, the promise of change. Lucius could almost feel the coming storm in the air, the tension building with every gust of wind, every creak of the library's wooden beams. It was as if the world outside was mirroring his own internal storm, the swirling thoughts and emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. The winds were shifting, carrying with them the echoes of the past, the whispered knowledge of those who had come before him. And Lucius could not help but wonder, was he prepared to bear the weight of what he was preserving? Was he ready for the responsibility that came with it? He took a deep breath, trying to center himself. The winds outside would continue to shift. The world would continue to change, regardless of what he did within these walls. But the knowledge he was transcribing, this ancient wisdom, would remain. Perhaps it would not remain in the same form, but its essence, its ideas, would endure. The spirit of discovery, the thirst for understanding, would never fade. Lucius took comfort in that thought. No matter what happened to this particular scroll, the pursuit of knowledge would never cease. Even when one chapter closed, others would open. With renewed determination, Lucius returned to his work. Each stroke of the quill was a silent vow to the past and a promise to the future. It was a gift to those who would come after him, a legacy that would continue to inspire, to inform, to guide. The wind outside may have been shifting, but the spirit of discovery, of learning, remained constant. And Lucius knew that no matter what happened to the world around him, the search for truth would never waver. As his quill glided across the papyrus, the shadows in the library seemed to recede, fading into the corners of the room. The wind, too, seemed to quiet, as if the storm outside had found its own rhythm, its own place in the world. Lucius was no longer alone with his thoughts. He was part of something much larger than himself, part of a legacy that spanned generations, a thread woven into the vast tapestry of human knowledge. Each word he wrote, each stroke of the quill, was a connection to the past and a contribution to the future. The library was not just a building. It was a living testament to the human spirit, a sanctuary of thought and discovery. And Lucius, with his quill in hand and his mind focused on the task before him, was carrying that legacy forward. He knew that knowledge, like everything else, was transient. It was born, it lived, and it died. But the impact it left behind, the ideas, the discoveries, the insights, those would endure long after the scrolls themselves had turned to dust. The winds might shift, but the thirst for understanding would never cease. Lucius pressed on, his quill moving more steadily now, the weight of the task becoming more familiar with every stroke. The storm outside, the creaking of the library, the flickering light of his lamp all seemed distant now. He was no longer just a scribe. He was a keeper of history, a guardian of knowledge. And as the hours passed, Lucius knew that whatever the future held, the legacy of those who had come before him would continue, carried forward by the hands of those who sought to preserve it, to understand it, and to share it with the world. The winds may shift, but the search for knowledge would remain forever constant. Lucius could feel the end drawing near. His fingers hovered above the papyrus, trembling slightly in the dim light of the flickering lamp. The scroll, once a mystery of aged symbols and fragile parchment, was now nearly complete, the final words just within reach. His quill, poised above the paper, seemed to sense the significance of this moment, as if it too was aware of the weight it carried. The library around him, once filled with the rustling of pages and the quiet hum of his work, had grown eerily still. Even the shadows seemed to hold their breath. The lamp flickered one last time, casting a soft golden glow across the ancient text. Its light seemed to dance across the words, illuminating them as if to mark this final moment in history. Lucius, his heart pounding, glanced down at the papyrus. The last stroke of his quill would be the final note in a journey that had stretched back through centuries. A journey that had seen the scroll pass through the hands of countless scribes, each one leaving their mark in the fabric of time. And now, it was his turn to finish what had been started long before he had ever come to this library, long before he had ever held a quill in his hand. For a moment, Lucius hesitated. The quill hovered above the page, its tip just barely touching the surface of the papyrus. He could feel the enormity of the moment pressing down on him, the weight of history hanging in the air like a heavy fog. This was no ordinary transcription. He knew that. This was the last copy, the final one. The words he would write would be the last to ever be inscribed. Once the ink touched the page, the world would change. The knowledge contained in this scroll would be sealed away, its secrets preserved for future generations. But once it was finished, it would be locked away, its power confined to the past. The scroll would no longer live in the hands of the living. It would fade into history, a relic of another age. Lucius closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The stillness of the library seemed to wrap around him like a blanket, insulating him from the world outside. The soft, distant sounds of the city, its bustle, its rhythm, felt as though they were miles away, irrelevant to the task at hand. The quiet of the library, the scent of old parchment and ink, the weight of the quill in his hand, these were the only things that mattered now. The final word was within his reach. He could feel it. With a steady hand, Lucius brought the quill to the papyrus. He dipped it into the ink, the rich, dark liquid shimmering in the dim light. His hand moved of its own accord, guided by something deeper than thought. Each stroke of the quill felt like a connection to something greater than himself. He was not just copying words. He was becoming a part of the history contained in those words, a bridge between the past and the future. And as he made the final stroke, the last of the words was written. It was done. Lucius sat back, his breath coming in slow, measured intervals. The weight of the moment settled upon him, heavy and unyielding. The quill fell from his fingers, clattering softly on the stone floor. He gazed at the completed scroll in awe, his eyes tracing the now finished text. It was hard to believe that the task he had set out to accomplish was now complete. The words, once a jumble of fading ink and worn papyrus, now seemed to glow in the lamplight, as if they were imbued with a power he had not fully understood until now. The journey he had undertaken to reach this point had been long, filled with moments of doubt, moments of revelation, and moments of quiet reflection. He had transcribed hundreds of scrolls in his life, but none had felt like this one. None had carried the same weight, the same sense of finality. This scroll had not just been a text, it had been a journey through time, through knowledge, through the minds of those who had come before him. It had been a conduit, carrying with it the essence of a civilization, the hopes, the dreams, and the wisdom of generations long past. He gently laid the quill down, feeling the chill of the library's stone walls seeping into his bones. The room felt colder now, as if the finality of the task had caused the temperature to drop. Outside, the world continued its unending cycle, the winds stirring, the stars shifting across the night sky. The city beyond the library continued to pulse with life, unaware of the profound act that had just transpired within these hallowed halls. To the outside world, Lucius was just another scribe, another anonymous figure laboring away in the shadows. But inside the library, within the walls that held the knowledge of the ages, he was the keeper of something far greater, something that would outlive him, something that would endure long after his own name had been forgotten. Lucius felt the weight of that responsibility settle on him. The scroll would soon be locked away, its secrets preserved for future generations. But what would those generations make of it? What truths would they uncover? What would they learn from the words he had just inscribed? The knowledge contained within this scroll was not just for him, nor for the scholars of his time. It was for the future, those who would come after him, those who would stand where he stood, who would seek the wisdom of the past to guide them through their own lives. The scroll would inspire awe, provoke thought, and perhaps even change the course of history. And yet, as Lucius sat there, contemplating the enormity of the task he had just completed, he couldn't help but feel a quiet sadness. What if it was forgotten? What if it was lost? Knowledge was fragile, after all, and even the most precious secrets could fade into oblivion. The flickering light of the lamp cast long shadows across the room, the air now thick with the quiet hum of finality. Lucius rose from his seat, his movements slow, deliberate. He carefully rolled the scroll, his fingers brushing gently against the papyrus. It felt impossibly delicate now, as though it might crumble beneath his touch. He tied the scroll with a crimson ribbon, its color a stark contrast against the pale yellow of the parchment. The ribbon was not just for protection, it was a symbol of the importance of what was contained within the scroll, a promise that it would be kept safe, preserved, and protected against the ravages of time. Lucius placed the scroll in a carved wooden case, the intricate designs on the surface seeming to come alive in the soft light of the lamp. He sealed it with a final, respectful gesture, ensuring that the scroll would remain safe, protected from the elements from the passage of time. He stood back for a moment, staring at the case. The scroll was now locked away, its secrets safe for the time being. He whispered a silent farewell to it, to the words, to the knowledge contained within it. He had done his part. The rest was up to those who would come after him. With a final glance at the scroll, Lucius turned and began to leave. His footsteps echoed softly in the empty library, the sound almost mournful in the stillness. The doors closed behind him with a soft final thud, and for a moment the library felt empty, as though it too was reflecting on what had just transpired. Lucius stepped out into the quiet night, leaving the echoes of the past behind him. He walked into the vastness of what lay ahead. History, after all, was not just written in ink and papyrus, not just in the words inscribed on scrolls and books. It was written in the hearts and minds of those who dared to dream, to seek, and to write the final word. And as Lucius stepped out into the world, he realized that his journey, like the scrolls he had written, was not truly over. There would always be another chapter, another word, another story to be written. And with that thought, he walked on, the quiet, invisible weight of the world's history at his back. For several long moments, Lucius remained motionless. The weight of the moment seemed to freeze time around him, the quiet of the library enveloping him like a shroud. It was a silence like none he had ever known, thick, almost oppressive save for the occasional flicker of the lamp's flame, casting brief, dancing shadows that stretched across the walls. Outside, the wind howled with the fury of an approaching storm, but inside, the library was untouched by the elements. The cold, damp air of the night seemed to stop at the thresholds of this sacred space, unable to penetrate the walls that had housed centuries of accumulated knowledge. Inside, there was only that heavy silence, the kind that follows the completion of something monumental, something that cannot be undone. Lucius glanced down at the scroll in his hands. The ink, still fresh but drying quickly, glimmered faintly in the dim light of his lamp. The words, once mysterious and unreadable, now lay complete before him. He had done it. The last copy had been made. Every character, every symbol carefully transcribed, each one an echo of the past, now bound forever in the fragile fibers of the papyrus. The words seemed to glow softly, as though they were more than just ink on paper, as if they contained a secret, a hidden power that Lucius could not fully comprehend. He had been a mere vessel, a tool to bring them to life once again. And now, as he sat there, staring at the completed scroll, it was as if the library itself held its breath, waiting for what would come next. But despite the accomplishment that should have filled him with satisfaction, Lucius couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The quiet that surrounded him felt different now, heavier, more profound. He had completed his task. The scroll was finished. But what came next? He had fulfilled his role as the final scribe. But now, in the wake of his work, there was only an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. The scrolls, filled with their ancient knowledge and mysteries, were safe, their contents preserved for future generations. But Lucius felt an unexpected emptiness. He had poured his soul into the task, and now that it was done, a strange, hollow space opened inside him. What was left for him now? His life's work, the work he had devoted so many years to, had come to an end. The silence in the library was deafening, the stillness so thick that it felt like it might suffocate him. Lucius set the scroll down carefully, feeling the weight of it shift in his hands. For a brief moment, he considered what he had accomplished. But then the realization hit him. The task was complete, but he didn't know what came after. He wasn't sure what to do now. Was he to simply leave, to walk away, having preserved the ancient knowledge for others to find, but with no idea what to do with that knowledge himself? He rose from the desk, stretching his tired limbs, feeling the strain in his back from hours hunched over the papyrus. The glow from the lamp seemed to dim, casting the library into shadow as his thoughts deepened. He walked slowly toward the window, his mind still swirling with the questions he could not yet answer. The moonlight outside had shifted, spilling its silver glow across the floor in long beams that illuminated the dust motes dancing lazily in the air. It was a beautiful night, peaceful even, but Lucius felt disconnected from it all. The world outside seemed so distant, so far removed from the stillness of the library. As he gazed out at the moon, he couldn't help but feel that he no longer belonged to that world. The library had been his life, his purpose, for so long that the outside world now felt alien to him. His gaze drifted to the city in the distance, the soft glow of distant torches flickering on the horizon. But even that seemed out of reach. The world went on, oblivious to the monumental act that had just occurred in the quiet heart of the library. And Lucius, who had dedicated so many years to this task, now found himself at a loss. He should feel triumphant. He knew that. Yet all he could feel was a profound emptiness, a hollowness that threatened to consume him. Perhaps it was the solitude of his work, the long, solitary hours spent in the company of books and scrolls that left him so alone in this moment of supposed triumph. He had done what was asked of him. The scrolls were complete, their ancient secrets preserved. But Lucius didn't feel victorious. He felt adrift, unsure of where to go from here. What was there left to do once the work had been completed? Lucius sighed softly, the sound of it almost lost in the vastness of the room. He looked at the scroll again, lying there on the desk, the last stroke of ink still fresh and black. The words, now final and untouched, held a strange kind of finality. And yet, despite this, Lucius felt a spark deep within him, a glimmer of curiosity that refused to die. What now? What did the future hold? Perhaps, he mused, his next task was not merely to preserve the past, but to bring it to life. Perhaps his role was not just to transcribe these ancient words, but to ensure that they would be heard, shared with the world. The stories contained within these scrolls were not meant to remain hidden, buried in the pages of a forgotten text. They were meant to be shared, to inspire, to challenge the minds of those who would one day read them. It wasn't enough to simply finish the task. Lucius now realized that his true work, his real purpose, had yet to begin. The thought lit a spark of determination within him. He was no longer just a scribe. He was a keeper of stories, a bridge between the past and the future. These words, these ideas, had to be heard. They had to be shared with the world, and it would be his job to ensure they were. He could not simply leave them to gather dust in the archives of the library. These were ideas that could change the course of history, that could inspire new generations of thinkers, philosophers, and dreamers. It was time for the world to hear them. With renewed resolve, Lucius turned away from the window and returned to his desk. His hand reached for the scroll, and he carefully rolled it, tying it with a crimson ribbon to ensure its safety. His eyes lingered on the finished document for just a moment longer, a sense of pride and sadness intertwining in his chest. The scroll had served its purpose for him, but its journey was far from over. It was time to share it, to breathe life into the words that had lived for so long in the silence of the library. The next day, Lucius decided he would seek out the scholars, the philosophers, the storytellers who could help him carry the words of the scroll into the world. The future generations needed to hear the wisdom it held, the truths it had preserved through the centuries. Lucius would ensure that these ancient stories would not fade into oblivion. They would live again in the hearts and minds of those who could understand them. As he stood there, looking at the scroll one last time, a sense of purpose began to fill the space left by the emptiness. The final word had been written, but that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new journey, one that would take him beyond the walls of the library and into the world. The promise of discovery, of new beginnings, of adventures yet to come, whispered to him in the silence of the library. Lucius felt it deep within himself. The future was waiting, and with a quiet sense of resolve, he knew that this was only the first chapter of his true journey. Tomorrow, he would take the first step toward sharing the ancient knowledge with the world, and with that, the next part of his life's work would begin. The library was as quiet as ever the following morning. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the grand windows, casting long, delicate shadows across the rows of books and scrolls that filled the cavernous room. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of old parchment and dust. But there was an underlying freshness to it now, as if the library itself had breathed in the early morning light, waking to another day of silent witness. Lucius, as was his habit, was the first to arrive. His footsteps echoed softly across the stone floors as he entered, the sound of solitude in the vast, empty space. But today, something felt different. The quiet seemed heavier, laden with expectation. He glanced down at the scroll that rested on the table in front of him, the one he had finished the night before. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. As the morning light struck the delicate parchment, the words upon it seemed to shimmer, as though they were alive, as though they had taken on a new quality that defied simple description. They were no longer the same words he had inscribed the night before. There was a depth to them now, a weight, as if the ink itself had somehow absorbed something more than just the meaning of the text. The scroll, now complete, seemed to hum with an energy that Lucius could feel beneath his fingertips, a pulse, a presence, like something ancient stirring. He sat back in his chair, taking in the sight of it. The scroll appeared unchanged at first glance, yet something about it seemed altered. The words, those once carefully formed lines of ink, held a certain vitality now, something beyond the mere transference of knowledge from one scribe to another. It was as if the scroll itself had come alive, awakening with a power that Lucius could not explain. There was an unsettling beauty to it, like standing on the edge of a precipice and gazing out over an infinite expanse, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. The secret of the library had always been that knowledge was eternal. Its walls were lined with the wisdom of the ages, its scrolls and books standing as silent sentinels of human achievement. But Lucius had learned something the night before, something that had unsettled him even as he had completed his task. Knowledge, he realized now, was not eternal at all. It was fleeting, like a candle's flame flickering in the dark, its light bright and warm one moment, only to be extinguished in an instant. Yet, in the fragile parchment before him, in the inked symbols he had painstakingly transcribed, there was a connection that reached beyond the limitations of time itself. It was not eternal in the sense he had once thought, but it was preserved. And in that preservation, something of its essence lived on. Lucius leaned back in his chair, staring at the scroll. The silence around him seemed to press in, intensifying the weight of this revelation. It was as though the library itself had whispered its ancient truth to him during the night, a truth that transcended the confines of time and space, reaching back to an age long forgotten. He had become part of something greater, something that connected the past to the present in ways that could not be fully understood. His role, the work he had done, was more than mere transcription. It was the preservation of a living legacy. But what did that mean? What was he supposed to do now that he had uncovered something so profound? As the sunlight grew stronger, spilling across the library floor in wide, golden bands, Lucius felt a sudden, urgent need to understand more. His thoughts raced, the questions in his mind building upon one another. What was it about the scroll that had changed overnight? Was it the words themselves? Or was it something deeper, something inherent in the act of preservation? The library, with its towering shelves and dusty volumes, held secrets that had been waiting for centuries to be uncovered. But Lucius felt certain now that these secrets were not just confined to the scrolls and books. They were alive, living, breathing things waiting to be found, and somehow he had stumbled upon them. He stood, the creak of the chair beneath him a stark contrast to the stillness of the room. The scroll was still in his hands, and as he carefully rolled it up, he could feel the warmth of its presence, the pulse that seemed to hum faintly beneath the surface. With a sense of renewed purpose, he tucked the scroll under his arm. He had to know more. He had to uncover the next piece of this puzzle, the next part of his journey. Lucius moved quickly, his footsteps no longer soft and contemplative but now purposeful, his mind racing ahead of him. He crossed the library, passing by rows of ancient bookshelves and silent volumes, each one a silent witness to the unfolding history of the world. His destination was at the far back of the library, where the oldest texts were stored, those books and scrolls that had not been touched in decades, perhaps even centuries. These were the volumes that few had the courage to approach, let alone read, for they were fragile, their pages yellowed and brittle with age. But Lucius knew they held the answers to the questions that now consumed him. The scroll he had just finished transcribing was but a small part of something far larger, and he felt an almost magnetic pull toward the forgotten tomes in the back of the library. As he reached the back shelves, Lucius paused. The air here was different, thick with dust and the scent of ancient leather. The shelves seemed to groan with the weight of the knowledge they held, a silent testimony to the generations that had come and gone. Lucius ran his fingers along the spines of the books, feeling the rough texture of their bindings, each one unique in its wear, its history. His eyes scanned the titles, many of which were indecipherable or written in languages he had never seen. But somewhere, in the midst of these forgotten texts, Lucius knew was the key to unlocking the next chapter of his journey. He reached for a particularly old-looking tome, its leather cover cracked and faded, its title worn away by the passage of time. As he opened it, a small cloud of dust rose into the air, causing him to cough softly. The pages inside were yellowed, and the ink had begun to fade, but the words were still legible, still rich with meaning. Lucius began to read, his heart quickening as the words seemed to leap off the page. This was it. This was the answer he had been searching for. The text was a record of ancient knowledge, a history of those who had come before him, scribes and philosophers who had walked these halls long before he had. Their lives, their thoughts, their discoveries. Lucius felt as though he were walking in their footsteps, discovering the same mysteries they had. And as he read, he realized that the scroll he had transcribed the night before was part of a much larger narrative, one that spanned across time, across centuries of human thought and exploration. This was no mere transcription. It was a continuation of the work that had begun long before him, and it would continue long after. He was part of something eternal, a keeper of knowledge that transcended generations. With each page he turned, the mysteries of the library began to unfold before him. It was as though the library itself had been waiting for him to uncover these secrets, to reveal the hidden truths that had been locked away for so long. Lucius felt a growing sense of responsibility. He was not just a keeper of books anymore. He was a guardian of stories yet to be told, of wisdom waiting to be shared. The next chapter of his journey was clear to him now. It was not enough to simply preserve the past. He had to bring it to life for others. The stories, the knowledge, the ideas contained within the ancient scrolls had to be shared with the world. Lucius knew that this was his calling. He was no longer just a scribe. He was a storyteller, a bridge between the past and the future, and he would do whatever it took to ensure that the library's secrets were not lost to time. With renewed purpose, Lucius left the back shelves of the library and returned to the scroll he had just completed. He looked at it once more, his fingers brushing the delicate parchment. This was just the beginning. The stories it held, the knowledge it contained, would now be shared with the world. He would make sure of it. Lucius walked out of the library, the ancient doors closing behind him with a soft thud. As he stepped into the world beyond, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that he was no longer just a keeper of books. He was a keeper of stories, a protector of knowledge, and the adventure, the true journey, was only just beginning. Lucius could never forget the feeling of that final stroke. It had been a simple motion, the quill meeting the page one last time, yet it carried with it a weight that would follow him for the rest of his life. The weight of knowledge, the weight of history, the weight of the responsibility that had now been entrusted to him. As he sat back and surveyed the completed scroll before him, the sense of finality that had accompanied the task now gave way to a deeper, more complex emotion. He had finished his work, but in the silence that followed, he realized that his true task had only just begun. The scroll lay before him, its ink now dry, its ancient secrets preserved for eternity. But Lucius knew in his heart that there was more to the library than the mere transcription of words, more to the knowledge than the ink on the papyrus. The scrolls were important. Yes, they carried the wisdom of the ages, the voices of those who had come before him, but the true legacy of the library was not found in the parchment or ink. It was found in the ideas, the discoveries, the stories that had been captured and passed down through time. It was the living, breathing essence of knowledge that had been carefully guarded within these walls for generations. Lucius stood up, his legs stiff from hours spent sitting in one place. But the weight in his chest was not a physical one. It was a calling, a deep sense of duty, a feeling that had settled into the marrow of his bones and refused to be ignored. The knowledge contained within the library was not simply to be preserved, it was meant to be shared, to be passed on, to be carried forward. And now it was up to him to ensure that the legacy of this knowledge did not end with him, but would live on for future generations. The library had always been a place of reverence, a sanctuary where the past and the present coexisted in harmony. Yet, even in its timeless beauty, Lucius now understood that it was more than just a repository of ancient texts. It was a beacon of enlightenment, a testament to humanity's relentless thirst for understanding and truth. The knowledge within these walls had been gathered over centuries, preserved by countless scholars, philosophers, and scribes, who had poured their hearts and minds into it. And now, standing amidst these towering shelves, Lucius realized the weight of the legacy he had inherited. As he wandered through the dimly lit aisles, his fingers brushing the spines of books and scrolls, Lucius could feel the presence of those who had come before him. The weight of their words, their thoughts, their struggles seemed to vibrate in the air around him. Each book, each scroll, held secrets of forgotten civilizations, the ideas of minds long gone, yet the knowledge contained within them was not lost. It was here, in the silence of the library, preserved for those who were willing to seek it out. He imagined the scribes who had transcribed these texts, their hands trembling with ink, their hearts filled with the same purpose that now filled his own. The ancient philosophers who had dared to question the world around them, the mathematicians who had unlocked the mysteries of the cosmos, the poets who had woven the threads of human experience into beautiful tapestries of language. Each one had contributed to this vast web of knowledge. Each one had added their voice to the collective story of humanity. Lucius could feel their presence as he walked among the shelves, their spirits alive in the words they had left behind. In that moment, An idea began to take root in his mind. A vision. A vision of a place where this knowledge could be made accessible to all, where anyone, regardless of their status or station in life, could come and learn, could reach for the wisdom of the past and shape their own understanding of the world. A place where the barriers that had once kept knowledge confined to the few could be broken down, where wisdom could be shared freely, unencumbered by the constraints of wealth, geography, or language. A place where all could seek the truth. Lucius stood still for a long moment, his mind racing with possibilities. He had always known the importance of the work he had done, the preservation of ancient knowledge, but now he understood that there was more to it than simply maintaining the past. The library was not just a place to store knowledge, it was a place to share it, to bring it to life. He had completed the task of transcribing the final scroll, but there was still work to be done. He could not simply lock away these treasures in the vaults of time. He had to ensure that others could access them, could learn from them, could carry the torch forward. It was then that Lucius understood the true calling that had been placed upon him. He was not merely a keeper of books and scrolls. He was a guardian of stories yet to be told, a bridge between the past and the future. The knowledge he had worked so hard to preserve was not his to keep. It was his to share, to cultivate, to nurture. And in order to do that, he needed to create something new, something that would allow this knowledge to flow freely, to break down the barriers that had kept it locked away for so long. A library, yes, but one unlike any other. A library that would not just house the wisdom of the past, but would embrace the future as well. A place where innovation and tradition could coexist, where the written word could be shared in new and creative ways, where scholars and storytellers could collaborate to bring the ancient text to life for a new generation of readers. Lucius dreamed of a library that would be open to all, a place where the pursuit of knowledge would be limitless, where curiosity would be fostered, and where ideas could flow freely, transcending time and place. The weight of this new vision settled on Lucius's shoulders, not as a burden, but as a purpose. It was a purpose that transcended the quiet walls of the library, a purpose that would reach beyond the shelves and scrolls, beyond the ancient manuscripts that lined the walls. It was a purpose that would change the world. Determined, Lucius set out to begin planning this new library, one that would honor the past while embracing the future. He walked with newfound resolve, knowing that his journey was far from over. The world was changing, and the library, too, needed to change with it. The knowledge of the ancients would not be lost. It would be shared, it would be celebrated, and it would continue to shape the world for generations to come. As he made his way through the labyrinth of shelves, his fingers brushing the spines of books that contained ideas, theories, and stories that had shaped the course of human history, Lucius knew that he was standing on the edge of something extraordinary. The world had been waiting for this moment, the moment when the knowledge of the past would meet the possibilities of the future. And Lucius, with his dream in his heart, was ready to bring that vision to life. With each step, his sense of purpose grew stronger. The library was not just a building. It was a living, breathing entity that held within it the collective wisdom of humanity. But that wisdom was not meant to stay hidden in the dusty corners of the world. It was meant to be shared. Lucius felt the weight of that responsibility and embraced it, knowing that he was about to embark on a new chapter of his journey, one that would be filled with challenges but also with opportunities. As he gazed at the vast collection before him, the weight of the task ahead was clear, but so was the spark of hope that ignited within him, a hope that one day the light of understanding would illuminate every corner of the world, and that the legacy of knowledge he had inherited would continue to grow, evolve, and inspire generations to come. The journey had just begun. As the days passed, Lucius found himself drawn more and more into the labyrinth of the library. The deeper he explored its vast, echoing halls, the more he realized that there was something beyond the scrolls and the well-worn books that had defined his life up until now. The library, that silent keeper of knowledge, held secrets buried beneath layers of time and dust, secrets that Lucius felt were calling to him, urging him to uncover them. The texts were merely a surface, a gateway into something far more profound. What lay beneath was the true knowledge of the world, and Lucius could feel, with an almost magnetic certainty, that it was his destiny to find it. Each morning, he would rise with the first light of dawn, the warmth of the sun filtering through the library's tall, narrow windows seemed to energize him, fueling his curiosity. He would walk through the halls, his footsteps echoing in the silence, drawn by the promise of discovery. The library, in its vastness, was a maze towering shelves stretching into eternity, laden with books and scrolls bound in faded leather, each one a mystery unto itself. The air was thick with the scent of parchment and ink, a smell so comforting that it felt like home, the very essence of the knowledge that had been preserved here for centuries. Lucius, who had long been content to transcribe the works before him, now felt the stirrings of a deeper purpose. There was something more, something that existed beyond the act of copying ancient texts, something that transcended the preservation of knowledge. He could feel it in his bones, a sense that his work here was not yet done. His path had begun with transcription, but it was leading him toward a new understanding, a deeper connection to the very essence of the library. One particular morning, as the sunlight streamed through the high, arched windows, casting a golden glow over the dusty volumes, Lucius found himself wandering down a narrow, forgotten corridor. The warmth of the light contrasted sharply with the cool shadows that clung to the stone floors and walls. His fingers brushed the spines of ancient books as he passed, but his mind was preoccupied with the restless curiosity that had been growing within him. His heart quickened as he reached a corner of the library he had never explored before, one that seemed somehow removed from the rest of the structure. There, tucked away in the shadows, he spotted a peculiar door. It was almost hidden behind a tapestry depicting a forgotten myth, one whose meaning Lucius had never fully understood. The door, made of dark, polished wood, stood in stark contrast to the surrounding stone walls. Intricate carvings covered its surface, delicate patterns woven into the wood as though it had been crafted by hands long lost to time. The designs were strange, almost otherworldly, and as Lucius ran his fingers over them, he felt a sudden pulse, a subtle hum beneath his touch, as though the door were alive. His curiosity, already piqued, surged within him, and without a second thought, he reached for the cool metal of the handle. The moment his fingers closed around it, a shiver ran up his spine. Slowly, he turned the handle, and with a soft creak, the door swung open, revealing a small, dimly lit chamber beyond. The air was thick with the scent of aged parchment and ink, the same smell that permeated the main halls, but there was something different about it here, something heavier, as though the room itself held secrets waiting to be uncovered. A palpable sense of mystery enveloped him, drawing him further into the space. The chamber was sparsely furnished, its walls lined with shelves that seemed to hold only the most precious and rare of books. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and upon it rested an ancient, weathered tome, The book's cover was embossed with a symbol that Lucius recognized, a mark that had appeared in some of the older scrolls he had transcribed, one that signified hidden truths, arcane knowledge, and power long forgotten. Lucius's breath caught in his throat as he approached the pedestal. The air around him seemed to grow still, the world outside the chamber fading into oblivion. He could feel the weight of the moment, the sensation that he was standing on the edge of something monumental, something that had been waiting for him, for this very moment in time. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the book, but it wasn't fear that caused it. It was anticipation, a thrill of discovery that surged through him as he lifted the tome from its resting place. The cover was cool to the touch, its surface cracked and worn by the ravages of time. Yet beneath that surface, the book seemed to hum with an energy that Lucius could not explain. It was as if the book itself had been waiting for him to unlock its secrets. Lucius gently opened the book, and the pages crackled softly as he turned them. The writing inside was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The language was unfamiliar, yet strangely comprehensible, as if the symbols themselves had been made to resonate with his mind. His eyes darted across the text, and with each word he felt something shift within him. It was as though the very essence of the library was speaking to him, guiding him toward a new understanding. He could feel it in the depths of his soul. This was no ordinary text. It was something more, something far older and far more powerful than anything he had ever encountered. As Lucius read, the words seemed to open up before him, revealing layers of meaning that he had never before understood. Each phrase, each sentence, connected to something deeper, something beyond the physical world. He felt a connection to the past, to the scholars and scribes who had written these words long before him, as though their thoughts and knowledge were now being passed directly to him. He wasn't just reading, he was experiencing the very thoughts of those who had come before him. It was in this moment, as he sat in that small, dimly lit chamber, that Lucius realized the enormity of what he had stumbled upon. The knowledge contained in the book was not meant for one person alone. It was meant to be shared, to be understood by the world. He had always known that the library held power, but now he understood that it wasn't just the power of the written word. It was the power of connection, the ability to bridge time, to bring the past into the present, and the present into the future. It was a knowledge that transcended the limits of the physical world and connected humanity to something greater, something eternal. Lucius closed the book gently, his fingers trembling as he did so. He sat there, lost in the weight of the discovery he had just made. The room was still, silent, but the silence now felt different. It was no longer the quiet of a library, a space where knowledge was simply preserved. It was the silence of possibility, of the unknown, of the future unfolding before him. In that moment, Lucius knew that his journey was just beginning. The library had given him the key to unlocking something greater, something far beyond what he had imagined. It wasn't just about preserving knowledge anymore, it was about sharing it, about ensuring that the wisdom of the ancients would live on, that it would be passed down to future generations, unbroken. The world had to hear these stories, these truths. And Lucius, with his new understanding, was ready to make sure they did. He stood up from the pedestal, the weight of the book still in his hands. He could feel the weight of the responsibility that now rested upon his shoulders. He wasn't just a keeper of scrolls anymore. He was a guide, a bridge between the past and the future. The library had opened up before him, revealing not just its hidden secrets, but its purpose, its true purpose. and Lucius was ready to embrace it. With a newfound sense of purpose, Lucius left the small chamber and made his way back to the heart of the library. The vast shelves of books, the rows of scrolls, and the whispers of knowledge seemed to welcome him back, as though they had been waiting for him to return. He knew what he had to do now. The path ahead was clear. His journey was not just about preserving knowledge. It was about bringing it to life, about sharing it with the world, and ensuring that the light of understanding would shine into every corner of the earth. Lucius walked forward, the weight of the book still heavy in his hands, but his heart lighter than it had ever been. The world was waiting for him, waiting for the knowledge that had been hidden in these walls for so long. And with that knowledge, he would change the world. And so, as the final words of the ancient scroll were whispered into history, Lucius stood at the edge of the library, feeling the weight of the moment settle around him. The task he had completed, the transcribing of the last of the scrolls, was an accomplishment unlike any other. Yet, as he stood there, the significance of the moment seemed to transcend the mere completion of his work. He was not finished, not by a long shot. In fact, the work that had been set before him was only just beginning. The Library of Alexandria, that revered monument of human knowledge, was more than just a repository of books and scrolls. It was a place of mystery, a place where the past and the future collided. The wisdom contained within its walls had been guarded for generations, its secrets and stories preserved by the hands of countless scribes. And now Lucius had become a part of that tradition. But as much as he had given to the library, he knew that the true responsibility lay not in what he had done, but in what would come next. He gazed around the library, his eyes sweeping over the towering shelves that seemed to stretch into infinity. The rows of scrolls and codices held the wisdom of ages, collected and preserved for future generations. But they were not just texts, they were living things, carriers of stories and knowledge that had shaped the course of human history. The flickering torchlight cast dancing shadows across the stone walls, and for a brief moment, Lucius could almost imagine the spirits of the scholars who had come before him, watching from the corners of the room. Their presence felt tangible, like a steady pulse that reverberated through the very foundation of the library. It was in that moment that Lucius realized the depth of his calling. The task ahead of him was immense, yes, but it was not one that could be avoided. The preservation of this vast repository of knowledge was no mere duty, it was a sacred mission. The weight of it settled on his shoulders, but instead of feeling burdened, he felt a profound sense of purpose. He had always known that the library held great power, but now he understood that it was not enough to simply protect the scrolls. He had to ensure that the knowledge within them was never lost, that it would be shared and passed on, not just to those who could read, but to all who sought the truth. Lucius turned and walked deeper into the heart of the library. The shelves seemed endless, rows upon rows of books, scrolls, and codices filled with the words of the greatest minds the world had ever known. As he passed by them, his fingers brushed the leather bindings, feeling the centuries of history woven into each one. He had always admired the work of the scholars who had come before him, their tireless dedication to the preservation of knowledge, their unwavering belief that wisdom, once gained, should be shared with the world. But now, it was his turn. The weight of their legacy pressed down on him, and yet Lucius felt a spark of hope. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be a part of something greater. This library, this treasure trove of human knowledge, was not just a building filled with books, it was a living testament to the enduring quest for wisdom. It was a beacon of enlightenment, one that would continue to shine brightly throughout the ages, no matter how many years passed. The words written in these scrolls were not just records of the past, they were a promise for the future, a call to future generations to continue the search for understanding, for truth. Lucius stood there for a moment, contemplating the vastness of the task before him. He could feel the weight of history on his shoulders, the responsibility of safeguarding this knowledge for those who would come after him. But even in the face of that daunting task, Lucius felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was not alone in this endeavor. Scholars, philosophers, and curious minds from all corners of the world had come to Alexandria, united by their shared passion for discovery. They would help him, support him, and together they would ensure that the light of knowledge would never fade. The library, once a place of solitude and silence, now felt alive with possibility. Lucius felt the stirrings of something new, something that transcended the work he had done in the past. The scrolls were not just to be preserved, they were to be shared, brought to life again. The wisdom contained within them had the power to shape the future, to guide those who would come after. It was his duty to ensure that the flame of knowledge would never be extinguished, that it would continue to burn brightly for all to see. As the dawn began to break, the first rays of sunlight streaming through the high windows of the library, Lucius felt a surge of hope rise within him. The light, soft and golden, seemed to fill the library with a new energy, as though it were a sign from the universe that this was just the beginning. The task ahead was monumental, but it was not one he would face alone. He had the support of the scholars who surrounded him, and the knowledge of those who had come before him to guide him. Together, they would continue the work that had been started long ago. Lucius walked slowly through the aisles, his eyes scanning the bookshelves, each one a testament to the human thirst for knowledge. He paused in front of one of the scrolls, its faded parchment a quiet reminder of the generations who had contributed to the library's wealth. The thought crossed his mind that this library was not just a collection of knowledge, it was a living entity, a place where the past and the future converged. The words written in these texts were not just records of history, they were the lifeblood of the future, the foundation on which new ideas would be built. He thought back to the many nights he had spent in this library, the countless hours spent transcribing, studying, and cataloging. He had learned so much, not just about the scrolls and the knowledge they contained, but about himself. In the silence of the library, he had found his true purpose. He was no longer just a scribe, a mere recorder of words. He was a keeper of wisdom, a protector of the past, and a guide to the future. His work had always been important, but now he understood just how crucial it was. The library had given him the tools to shape the future, and it was now his responsibility to ensure that future generations could continue the search for knowledge. Lucius paused again, his hand resting on one of the shelves. His heart swelled with pride as he looked at the vast expanse of the library. It was not just a building filled with books, it was a beacon of hope, a symbol of humanity's unending quest to understand the world. And it would continue to be so, as long as there were those who sought the truth, those who were willing to carry the torch forward. With a final glance at the rows of scrolls and books, Lucius turned toward his desk, ready to continue his work. The morning light bathed the library in a golden glow, and Lucius knew that he was not alone. The knowledge of the ages was with him, the wisdom of those who had come before him, and the promise of a brighter future for all who sought to learn. This was his calling, and he would answer it with all the strength he had. The library would endure. the light of knowledge would continue to shine. And Lucius, the humble scribe who had once merely recorded the words of others, was now its guardian, its protector. He had found his place in the tapestry of history, and he would see to it that the library's legacy lived on. Ending note. If you've enjoyed this journey into the heart of the Library of Alexandria, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the ancient world. Who knows what secrets we'll uncover next? Stay tuned for the next chapter in our exploration of history's greatest mysteries.